If you were a small-town sheriff who was suddenly caught in the crossfire between a bus full of violent criminals, a team of ruthless mercenaries, a Category 5 hurricane, and a swarm of bloodthirsty alligators, what would you do? Playing babysitter for 5 of Louisiana's most wanted would be a bad enough way to spend the night. But when Mother Nature herself throws a pack of armored reptiles into the mix, it won't be long before all hell breaks loose. And all bets are off. We're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to survive the GATOR-POCALYPSE in the flood. This sheriff is about to have the worst night of her life. Far out in the bayous of southwest Louisiana, this bus full of prisoners is about to be caught in the middle of a massive hurricane. The guys riding inside aren't exactly the best that society has to offer. There's the dealer, Big Jim, robber Jocks, murderers Floyd and Angelo, and cop killer Russell Cody. Concerned about getting stuck out in the rain, the 2 guards, Officers Elkins and Stamper, start arguing about whether or not it's safe to keep going. The storm is already getting worse, but there's a small town called Latree coming up not too far ahead, so it's all aboard the magic school bus to see if the local sheriff will put them up in her station for the night. It seems like a good enough plan, but what none of them realize is that there's a squad of heavily armed mercenaries led by a man named Rafe, with their eyes on the bus as well, and it won't be long before they show up to crash the party. Meanwhile, at the station, Sheriff Joe Newman orders one of her deputies to go stack some sandbags in the back alley before the entire building is turned into a swimming pool. The man reluctantly gets to work, but he has no idea that a pair of hungry alligators have just infiltrated the town's sewer system, and they're heading straight for him. Making his way down to the storage room, he discovers that the entire lower level is already flooded with waist-high water. He's still more afraid of his boss than whatever could be lurking down there in the shadows, so the deputy presses on, but that was his biggest mistake. Turning on his flashlight, he spots the sandbags tucked away at the far end of the room and lazily crosses over to start loading them up. While grabbing them from the shelf, the deputy is nearly electrocuted by a cluster of exposed wires from the station's disabled security cameras, so he decides to wrap his jacket around the wires to keep them dirty, having no idea that there's a gator eyeballing him just a few feet away. Just then, the deputy notices the sound of water splashing from somewhere in the room, although he's sure that it wasn't him. Turning around to check it out, he ends up getting startled by another noise and drops his flashlight into the water. Frustrated, he swims around in the dark until he finally finds it again, but now the flashlight seems to be stuck on something. Suddenly, his entire body is pulled under as the gator rips his arm off and begins eating him alive, with no one upstairs ever realizing what happened. Okay, somebody needs to call animal control because these officers have a serious gator problem on their hands. This poor guy never even saw it coming, but let's take a minute to break down where it all went wrong and what he might have done differently. To be completely fair, there was really no reason at all why this guy should have expected a hungry swamp puppy to suddenly appear in the station's basement, even if he doesn't live in Louisiana. But with that being said, there were a few obvious warning signs that he was walking into a dangerous situation. Even without gators lurking in the darkness, entering an already flooded basement during a severe hurricane can quickly turn into an incredibly dangerous situation in and of itself. First off, there's the threat of an unexpected encounter with raw electricity, which the deputy here nearly experienced for himself. You probably won't even be able to tell if the water is electrified until it's too late. Besides that, the water could also be contaminated with sewage, chemicals, and dangerous bacteria, leading to sickness and infection if you're exposed. Of course, there's also the risk of flash flooding. The deputy could easily drown if he somehow got stuck down there, and if the building were to suddenly collapse. All things considered, the deputy here probably could have refused the sheriff's orders out of concern for his own safety. And that's before we've even discussed the real danger that was waiting for him down there, which were the gators. Like we've already mentioned, the chances of finding an alligator in your basement are very slim, but when you live in Louisiana, that changes. That's because Louisiana is home to the largest population of alligators found anywhere in the world, beating out even Florida. The state's extensive network of wetlands, marshes, swamps, and bayous provide an abundant source of food, nesting sites, and breeding grounds for these modern dinosaurs. With so many living nearby, it's definitely possible that the severe flooding could have displaced some gators into the streets. And then when they sought shelter, they ended up in a basement like this. It's a well-established fact that alligators have a liking for murky water. Murky water provides them with natural camouflage, allowing them to easily blend in with their surroundings and avoid being detected by anything that they might want to snack on. If you put them in a place where you wouldn't normally expect to see them, like here in the basement, that might make it extra difficult to know if any were around. But one way that the deputy here might have checked is by shining his flashlight across the surface of the water before going in, and watching for the light to shine back at him in the reflective surface of their eyes. Another mistake was that the deputy didn't hear the gators vocalizing, or simply didn't realize what it was. Now, we've already established that the deputy here never saw it coming, but if he'd had any time to react, then there are a few strategies that he might have tried to make it out of this alive. The first thing to do here, obviously, would be to immediately start screaming for help. With any luck, one of the other deputies or the sheriff might have heard him and been able to provide some assistance. Unfortunately, you're probably not getting out of a gator attack without taking on some pretty serious, potentially life-threatening injuries either. If you're ever unlucky enough to get grabbed by a gator, experts suggest that you need to fight back as hard as you possibly can, with whatever means necessary to defend yourself. You'll want to aim for the gator's eyes, nose, throat, or sensitive underbelly, since those are basically its only natural weak points. If you can, you should try to use any objects or weapons that are at your disposal to boost your chances of winning the fight. In this case, the basement was full of items like the sandbags and other objects from the storage shelves that he could have used to stun the gator and get away. The key here is to simply make yourself as difficult to attack as possible. Being ambush predators by nature, gators aren't necessarily looking for a fair fight. Instead, they prefer to take down prey that isn't too much of a hassle, and the gator may choose to release you if it feels like the attack is no longer worth it. Although weak points and strategies are great on paper, I'm not going to stand here and say that you'd have much of a chance at all when it comes down to throwing down with a 15-foot-long, 1,000-pound apex predator, but it's always better to have some sort of plan if you don't want to end up like the deputy here. Back up on dry land, the prison bus finally arrives at the station, and Elkins goes inside to meet the sheriff, all while Rafe and his squad are watching them patiently from across the street, waiting for just the right moment to strike. The sheriff reminds Elkins that her station is already on its last legs, but he promises to make sure that the prisoners don't cause any trouble, and that they'll be all out of her hair as soon as the storm clears. The officers lead the prisoners through the building and escort them to the holding cells where they'll be spending the night. A few of them try to intimidate the sheriff by showing off that they aren't afraid of her, but she quickly puts them in their place and establishes herself as the one who's really in control. It's not going to be an easy night for any of them, but the sheriff says that as long as they behave themselves until the morning, she and her deputies will return the favor. Stepping back out into the front lobby, the sheriff starts to wonder where that deputy who was supposed to be putting out the sandbags has been this whole time. All of a sudden, their conversation is abruptly cut short as a barrage of automatic gunfire completely obliterates the front door. The two of them immediately take cover behind their desks and begin returning fire with their sidearms. But it's clear that they're heavily outgunned, and one wrong move could end with them taking a bullet. Hearing the commotion, Elkins decides to go check it out for himself, leaving Stamper to watch over the prisoners, just as Rafe and his squad finally breach into the building. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, the sheriff and her deputy are left with no choice but to surrender. The sheriff starts talking it out with the attackers, trying her best to keep the situation under control. But Elkins is too much of a hotshot to listen when she quietly signals for him to stay out of sight. Raising his pistol, he suddenly spins out from cover and orders the attackers to freeze. But one of Rafe's men hits him with a blast from his shotgun that sends him flying backwards across the room, killing him instantly. Okay, just when it seemed like things couldn't get any worse, here comes Officer Elkins to the rescue. They're dealing with a bus full of dangerous convicts, an army of bloodthirsty alligators, a group of heavily armed mercenaries, and even Mother Nature herself trying to kill them. But leave it to your own guy to come along and escalate the shootout when you're already clearly outnumbered and outgunned as it is. You've gotta learn to read the room, Elkins, because you f***ed up. It's nice to finally show up after the gunfight is already over, but the hard truth of the matter is that things never should have come to this in the first place. Think about it this way. As a driver for the Department of Corrections, who's been trusted with the responsibility of transporting some of the state's most dangerous prisoners, it's reasonable to think that he should have been trained to identify security threats, like attempted hijackings and jailbreaks. I get that people make mistakes no matter how much training that they have, and you can't consistently be on your guard at all times, but think of the context here. They're driving through a raging hurricane when there are exactly 0 other cars on the road, but he didn't notice that the weird truck towing a trailer full of jet skis parked out in the absolute middle of nowhere for no good reason had pulled out right behind them and started following the bus all the way into town. Then that same truck parks directly across the street from the station and he's still not noticing the red flags? That's just bad situational awareness through and through, and you can see why this was a crucial mistake. So alright, leading the bad guys straight to the station was a big enough mistake, but then Officer Elkins here decided to make things even worse when he chose to leave his partner behind instead of staying to help him lock the prisoners down. On top of that, he completely ignored the sheriff when she was clearly telling him not to start blasting. She gave Elkins here every opportunity to approach things a little more carefully, but he decided to go full Leroy Jenkins and even winked at her before doing it. And that's just crazy. As it turns out, the bad guy was just about to explain why they could trust that he wouldn't shoot them, but Elkins here said, "I know what to do, let me jump right out into the open and yell freeze, that'll show him." Which turned out to not be the most effective tactic. Who would have guessed? That little stunt could have easily gotten the others killed too, but luckily it was only Elkins who had to pay the price. Sorry Elkins, I like the enthusiasm, but you f***ed up. Moments later, the sheriff suddenly enters the holding area, followed by Rafe and his squad. Confused, Officer Stamper immediately raises his weapon, but he quickly decides to surrender since the odds of him winning a shootout here are slim to none. The other prisoners are thrilled to see that they might be getting out early, but the truth is that Rafe isn't here for them. Approaching the cells, he goes straight for the one where they're holding Cody and orders the sheriff to open the gate. Unlike the rest of the prisoners, Cody seems to be the only one who isn't happy to see Rafe and his men, and it won't be long before the others realize why. Although they came to break him out, these two aren't exactly on the same team. Ignoring the other prisoners begging for his help, Rafe turns back to the sheriff, asking where he can access the station's security cameras. She insists that they haven't worked for months, but Rafe won't believe it until he can confirm this for himself. So he sends this woman Ava to escort the sheriff down to the storage room for proof, while he and his minion Nate force the 2 remaining officers into the open cell. Meanwhile, the injured guy suddenly notices that one of the massive gators is hungrily watching him from the shadows. As the beast lunges towards him, he quickly raises his rifle in a pathetic attempt to defend himself, but the gator closes the distance before he can land a shot, tearing the man apart and devouring him one chunk at a time. Okay, that right there has got to be one of the worst attempts at survival that I've ever witnessed. This highly trained mercenary here just failed to kill an alligator with an automatic weapon when it was a life or death scenario, and that's just embarrassing. The first rule of surviving a gator fight is to always remain calm. You need to be thinking clearly so that you can make the right decisions, and as soon as he saw that gator coming his way, this guy should have either committed to running for the stairs or immediately started opening fire instead of continuing to sit there like a deer in headlights. All in all, getting shot in the neck and then eaten by an alligator is what you might call a pretty rough night at the office. As for the sheriff, it's safe to say that the situation looks pretty bad, but there might be a way that she can turn this nightmare around. If you think about it, Rafe here made a critical mistake by only sending her with 1 guard, since this is the only chance that she's probably ever going to get where there's only 1 person watching her, and she already knows the layout of the station like the back of her hand. The way that I see it, she has two options. First, she could try waiting for just the right moment to get the upper hand on Ava and take her weapon. If she could do the job quietly without attracting any attention from the others, then this would give her plenty of time to find a phone and call for help from another nearby station, as long as the phone lines are still up and running, that is. Next, I'd try to stock up on whatever supplies that I can find to help turn the tables against these creeps. There's a good chance that the station might have some form of flashbangs, stun grenades, tear gas, body armor, or even tasers that she could use against them. Anything that would get her prepared for another fight. She could even grab an extra weapon from that dead guy out in the front hallway and use it to go in to rescue the others. If another fight were to break out, she could just try to focus on taking down Rafe first, since without their leader, the remaining attackers might fall into disarray and decide to give up the fight while they still have a chance to escape. Although taking the station back by force would be cool and all, there's also option 2. Find a chance to run off while Ava's guard is down, and leave the others to fend for themselves. Self-preservation is almost always going to be priority number 1, and if she can manage to escape from the station, then there's no reason why the sheriff couldn't send more well-prepared officers in to get things back under their control once she was a safe distance away. There should be a squad car or even a bus out in the parking lot that she could use to make a quick exit, unless of course the streets are already so flooded that traveling by road is completely impossible. Neither option is perfect, and she's going to have to take some risks, but if the sheriff is ever going to make a move of any kind, now would be the best time to try while the numbers are at least even. As the two of them are making their way down to the storage room, Ava here points out that she and the sheriff look alike and starts daydreaming about how maybe she could have been a cop, instead of turning to a life of crime if it wasn't for her troubled childhood. The sheriff sees this as an opportunity to reason with her, but the woman is still loyal to her boss, and forces her to continue with the plan. When they finally get down to the basement, the sheriff abruptly stops in her tracks after seeing the whole place is already flooded, and instead tries pointing Ava's attention toward the exposed wires to prove from a distance that she was telling the truth about the cameras. After thinking it over for a minute, Ava decides that it's good enough for her, but that's when the sheriff notices her deputy's flashlight still shining under the water and insists that they go check it out, with Ava following close behind. Crossing the room, the sheriff reaches down to grab the light, but immediately pulls back horrified when the deputy's severed arm suddenly comes up with it. Just then, the woman turns around to see one of the gators sliding down the stairs right behind them, blocking their only exit. As it slips into the water and swims below the surface of the room, Ava starts blindly shooting in the creature's general direction, but ends up missing every shot. The sheriff finally convinces her to stop, worried that she might hit one of the several propane tanks that are stacked in the corner, and the two of them stand there frozen with fear as the gator circles them in. Suddenly, the gator lunges out of the water straight towards Ava, and the sheriff seizes the opportunity to make a break for the door. Overwhelmed, Ava is quickly grabbed by her legs and dragged underwater, with one gator pulling her into a death roll, while another switches targets and goes after the sheriff. Luckily, she's able to hold it back and shut the door, escaping while the gators are busy eating what's left of Ava. Okay, I'm starting to think that these gators just might take them all out, and that'll definitely be the case if they keep fighting back like this. Let's see, right off the bat, these two already saw the alligator coming this time, which gives them much better odds than what happened to the first deputy. It would have been a close call, but they definitely should have had time to either rush over and shut the door before it got in, or jump up onto some furniture to at least get out of the water and possibly escape through the windows near the ceiling. As it began to circle them in, they could have tried distracting the gator by taking advantage of its natural instincts and throwing something into the water on the opposite side of the room before making their exit while it investigated the sound. That would imply that the sheriff and Ava are on the same team though, and if it were me, I'd have strongly considered shoving Ava here straight towards the gators, using her as a meat shield while I make a break for the door. Not only would this be distracting the gators, but it would give me an easy way to thin out the mercenaries' numbers while getting myself to a safer spot. Now all that the sheriff needs to do is avoid being discovered while she finds a way to call for help, and either get the hell out of there or go back to the others using the element of surprise to her advantage. Sure, having a basement full of man-eating alligators isn't exactly ideal considering everything else that she already has to deal with. But on the bright side, the gators might have just bought the sheriff her best chance to escape. so she needs to take advantage of the opportunity however she can. Thinking that they should have been back by now, Rafe decides to go check on Ava and the sheriff, leaving Nate to watch over the guards and prisoners while he's gone. It isn't long before he stumbles across the injured guy's severed head bobbing around out in the hallway, and finds the exhausted sheriff catching her breath in the stairwell. Rafe immediately asks the sheriff what happened, but the question answers itself before she can respond, because just then, he spots the two gators coming their way, and they decide to run while they still have the chance. With the gators still chasing them through the halls, Rafe and the sheriff make it back to the others just in time. One of the men goes to let them in, but as soon as he opens the door, all of the water from the hallway comes rushing in too. Suddenly, one of the gators grabs Rafe by the leg, pulling him back out into the hall. Cody actually rushes over to save him, holding onto Rafe for as long as he can, but the gator is too strong and manages to win the fight in the end, dragging him away while the others could only watch. Cody manages to get the door closed, but the gators are still right on the other side. In the confusion, the sheriff reaches for a weapon that she spots nearby, but Nate stops her before she can grab it. Realizing that he's now outnumbered, Nate decides to unlock the cells, planning to let the prisoners take care of his dirty work while he figures out a way to escape. While the sheriff is busy fighting for his life, Cody gets his hands on Rafe's weapon, and that's when he decides that it's time to take control of the situation, ordering Nate to stand down and let everyone go, including the two officers. With everyone calmed down, the sheriff announces that there are at least 4 gators in the building, and Big Jim points out that they're just trying to survive the storm, which might explain why they're acting so aggressively. They need to come up with an escape plan, but the gators are still between them and the exit, and the town outside won't be any better. As part of their own escape plan, Rafe had a hidden pair of jet skis nearby, but there's only 2, so unless there's anyone willing to swim, they'll have to think of something else. Thinking it over, the sheriff decides that they need to get to the derelict upper floors where they can wait it out, and if any of them are going to make it, then they need to work together as a team. The officers and guards aren't too sure about this for obvious reasons, but with no other options, they all agree to put their differences aside for their own survival, at least for now. Okay, they have their plan, but let's take a moment here to assess their strategy. Considering how high the water has already gotten, going up seems like a good idea, but it's more of a band-aid than a long-term solution. After all, there's no telling how much water could rise if the flooding continues, and the storm doesn't seem to be slowing down. It could be only a matter of time before they're right back where they started and dealing with the gators again anyway. It's obviously wisest to try avoiding confrontation first, but if it comes down to where they have to fight these hungry gators, then there might be ways for them to even the odds just a little bit. First off, there's 4 gators while there's 9 of them, so purely from a numbers perspective, the survivors are already working with the advantage. Plus, a few of these guys are built like pro wrestlers, and most importantly of all, they have firepower. Now, even with all of that working in their favor, they'd probably still be in big trouble if all 4 gators attacked at the same time. But it could also be possible to lure them in and take them out one at a time to keep things more manageable. We've all seen alligator wrestling on TV. Just jump on these things' back and hold its mouth shut. Simple, right? I mean, I'm pretty much 100% sure that nothing could possibly go wrong. But still, I'd let somebody else try it first. I'm more of an idea guy than a gator wrestler at the end of the day, but Angelo and the other convicts at least look like they could hold their own. With the situation being what it is, it's wise for them to work together for now, but I seriously doubt that these prisoners are going to be very cooperative in the long run, since this is the best chance that they're ever going to get to escape. So the sheriff still needs to be careful. Using a rope made of bed sheets, the sheriff manages to climb up into the vents through a service hatch in the ceiling. The others begin following her up one at a time, but the process ends up taking so long that the gators are actually on the verge of evolving to the ability to open doors. Finally, it's Jox's turn, with only Stamper, Nate, and Floyd still waiting in line behind him, but he's working on a little plan of his own. Knowing that the gators might break through the door at any second, Jox starts doing whatever he can to stall for time, unintentionally leaving the others in a vulnerable position. Sure enough, one of the gators manages to get inside, while Jox is still climbing, so Stamper knocks Floyd out with a strike from his weapon, using him as a meat shield while he and Nate make their escape. Getting to his feet, Floyd rushes over to the rope and starts begging for Jox to help him up. The man grabs onto his hand, but as soon as Floyd lets his guard down, Jocks loosens his grip, deliberately sending him plummeting back into the water. Terrified, Floyd attempts to fight back as one of the gators grabs him by the arm, and the officers start indiscriminately firing into the room from above, but as usual, they end up missing every shot, and Floyd is torn apart before their very eyes. They aren't safe yet though, and as one of the gators roars up at them from below, the deputy fires a shot straight into its mouth that seems to injure it. But the moment that he turns his back on the water, the gator leaps all the way up to the ceiling and drags him back down, killing him as well. At this point, everyone is good and freaked out because there's nothing that they can do besides moving forward. With no other choice, the survivors proceed to crawl through the world's strongest air ducts until they finally emerge somewhere on the rundown upper floors. To make matters even worse, the sheriff quickly notices that at the rate that the ceiling is leaking, this entire building could come down on top of them at any moment. And then the gators would be the least of their worries. After checking in with Stamper, she decides that she needs to go scope out the floor upstairs to see if it's any better. Okay, well, it's a good thing that they're finally on dry land at least, but now we've seen how high these gators can jump, and I'm starting to get worried that nowhere is safe. As always, their main goal at this point should still be to focus on calling for help, since even the upper floors won't be able to help them if the whole station goes down. While one of them is trying to find a working phone or some other way to send a distress signal, the others should use this opportunity to look for supplies. The station should be full of helpful equipment that they can use now that they know they're up against a swarm of angry gators. Maybe they could find a stash of flares, which could double as both an offensive option and a way to signal for help. There's also a chance that they might find a few tasers that they could use to defend themselves from the gators. If we're really lucky, the water might even boost the taser's effects and take out more than one gator at a time. I'd also search for some body armor to help them protect from any alligator bites, and any medical supplies that they could drum up just in case anyone else gets hurt. Now that they won't drown or be eaten, it's probably a safe time to find some cuffs and restrain the prisoners to something instead of letting them all walk around freely. After all, it's only a matter of time until someone betrays the sheriff and Officer Stamper, as they'll be finding out the hard way soon enough. Meanwhile, Angelo here starts coming up with his own plan to jump the guards and escape. Jocks likes what he has to say, but Big Jim here isn't so sure, pointing out that even if they do get away, they probably wouldn't last very long in the middle of a gator-infested hurricane. Angelo says that he's just being a coward, but before they can do anything, the sheriff comes back and orders Jocks and Cody to follow her upstairs, while Stamper stays here to babysit the others. With the sheriff leading the group, they begin making their way up the damaged and flooded staircase to the next floor. This level hasn't been used for years, so it was in bad shape even before the storm came through, but the sheriff tells the others to search around for anything that they can use as a weapon, just in case they end up having to fight their way out. While they're looking, the sheriff decides to ask Cody what exactly was going on between him and Rafe. It turns out that Cody here was the getaway driver on a job that went wrong and ended up getting hit with all of the charges, even though he never actually fired a shot, meaning that he's not such a bad guy after all. Meanwhile, the situation is still tense on the lower floor, with everyone trying to anticipate the others' next moves. Just then, Angelo spots a handgun sitting on a desk in the next room, and this gives him another idea. All of a sudden, a chute at the back of the room begins to fill up with water, and one of the gators rides the wave right up to the next floor. The sheriff raises her weapon while Cody takes his sidearm, waiting for just the right moment to open fire. But before they can take it down, the gator lunges straight for Jocks and tears open his stomach. Badly injured, but still alive, Jocks starts crawling for his life, as the two others are still struggling to land so much as a single shot. Neither of them are able to get a hit until the gator chomps down and tears off Jocks' face. But the sheriff finally finds her target and takes the gator down just a few seconds too late. Okay, I don't know what's worse, the sheriff's stormtrooper aim or the fact that Jocks didn't even run for it when he had the chance. Normally during a gator attack, I think that the suggestion is to start backing away slowly. But in this case, you've got two other people for the gator to go after, so why not make a break for it and use them as meat shields while you escape? So far the score is gators 7 to humans 1. But now that the gator wasn't actually in the water, they were finally able to take one down with enough force. With this in mind, I'd make it a priority to regroup with the others and bring everyone upstairs. This way, we'd all be able to work together and we'd have the dry land advantage if the other gators came back for another fight. They should work together to barricade the upper floors as best as they can to prevent any more gators from finding their way in. And of course, signal for help from the outside as soon as they possibly can. Meanwhile, on the floor below, Stamper and Nate get distracted by the sounds of gunfire and decide to check it out, which is when Angelo suddenly goes rogue. While the guard has his back turned, Angelo sneaks into the next room and comes back out with a Glock aimed directly at the officer. Big Jim rushes in to save his life, headbutting Angelo and taking him down, but in the chaos, the officer ends up accidentally shooting his savior in the shoulder. Shaking it off, Angelo uses Big Jim as a meat shield to close the distance, grabbing onto Stamper's shotgun and knocking the man straight to the floor with one punch. Big Jim recovers just in time, tackling Angelo into a cluster of lockers and using a nightstick to beat him down. But Angelo counters with a paralyzing chop straight to the neck, stunning Big Jim and turning his attention back to the injured officer. Kneeling over him, he begins ruthlessly beating the man with his bare hands, all while Nate only stands there and watches, still refusing to get involved on either side. Taking his weapon, Angelo orders Nate to show him where they hid the jet skis. It looks like they're about to escape after all, when suddenly the ceiling above them collapses out of nowhere. Cody and the sheriff come tumbling down, along with a sharp metal pole that pierces straight through Nate's chest. At the same moment, one of the gators sneaks up from behind and grabs Angelo by his leg, dragging him around the corner to his death. The three remaining survivors regroup, quickly grabbing whatever weapons that they find since their ammo supply is running dangerously low. That's when another gator shows up to claim its next victim, but Big Jim tells the others to stand back and let him handle this one Louisiana style. Using his swamp man powers, he starts mesmerizing the gator by patting it on the nose while staying just out of its reach, luring it back out into the hallway before suddenly diving onto its back and grabbing it by the nostrils as he pulls the gator's head up to give it a little kiss on the snout. But all of a sudden, the gator throws its body weight to the side and starts rolling like a log back and forth down the hall until it finally knocks Big Jim off, before snapping down on his neck and dragging his lifeless body out of sight. Okay, I knew some good old-fashioned gator wrestling would work. Well, kind of. Anyway, it really looked like Big Jim had it there for a minute until he got chomped, but at least he proved to be a good distraction. This actually makes things fairly simple. They've got 2 survivors left and 2 jet skis to get around, so everyone has a ride. They just need to grab the keys from Nate's body and fight their way out of there while they still can. The jet skis shouldn't be too far away unless the bad guys were planning to swim to them. So it's time to make a break for it while they have a chance and hope that the gators don't catch them first. Horrified, Corey and the sheriff start backing away as the gator returns to finish the job, when suddenly, Rafe shows up and starts blasting it with a shotgun, killing the gator and saving their lives. It turns out that the gators mistook Rafe for dead, but now he's back to get Cody out of here and finish what they started. They're getting ready to make a run for the jet skis, but the sheriff tells them to go ahead without her, saying that she has a plan. So Rafe hands her the shotgun with only 1 shell left and wishes her luck before going their separate ways. Down in the flooded hallways on the first floor, Rafe tells Cody that they need to leave the sheriff for dead and get out of there while they still have the chance, but Cody refuses to play along, snatching the keys out of Rafe's hand. The confrontation quickly escalates into a full-blown brawl, with the men exchanging a flurry of punches, knees, and headbutts until Rafe finally surrenders. Begging Cody to come to his senses, Rafe reminds him that if they let the sheriff survive, then she'll be able to identify them when this is all over, but Cody still refuses to listen. Furious, Rafe comes at him with the sneak attack, grabbing Cody by the neck and forcing him underwater. Meanwhile, back upstairs, the sheriff ducks into a side room when she sees a swarm of gators closing in on her. Waiting for just the right moment, she fires her only shot into a nearby gas canister, causing a massive explosion that vaporizes the gators while she takes cover behind the wall. As luck would have it, the explosion takes Rafe out too. leaving only Cody and the sheriff to escape on the jet skis. Cody asks the sheriff if she's going to turn him in, but she promises to tell the world that she was the only survivor. The two speed off on their jet skis before eventually going their separate ways, and it looks like the sheriff has just learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the real gators are the friends that we make along the way. But what would you do? This is obviously a situation that I could never see myself getting involved with because 1, I'm not a police officer, and 2, I would never in my life go to Louisiana. I do like the idea of them both riding off in the separate directions, going their own separate way. I mean, that was a really cool ending. But yeah, let us know what you would do in this situation down in the comments below. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out that How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. And have a damn good day.